Hello and welcome to OPAGC Sociology, and today we're going to be looking at how do sociologists explain the difference in criminal behaviour between men and women. So if you do now, I'm just going to give you five to 10 minutes to answer this question. Identify and explain one reason why corporate crime may be underrepresented in crime statistics. So if you're stuck on that one, look at the previous video, look at the Marxist stuff, look at Nelken, and we will reconvene in about 5-10 minutes. So I'll just pause the video. It's a 4 marker, and make sure you're using that die approach you can see on the screen. Right, so just to sort of illustrate the difference in terms of crime between men and women. So the ONS 2019, the total number of people in prison and young offenders institutes for March 2019 was 82,643. Of these, 78,806 were men and 3,837 were women. In other words, roughly 95% of that population were men and 5% were women. So you can see there's a massive divide there. And you can see there's an ONS stat here from 2012 that kind of helps to illustrate that. But we can also highlight here that there is a difference. There are certain crimes that maybe women are more likely to commit as well. So just for task one, I just want you to maybe note down some of your ideas why you think men are more likely to commit crime compared to women. Right, so we're going to go over and look at some of those explanations as to why maybe it appears men commit more crimes. So for task 2, just note down a summary of each different theory as we go along. So this is very much associated with feminist theory. So this is Heidenson, who believes patriarchy often means that women are restricted in society, having an impact on their opportunities for crime, to commit crime. So men therefore commit more crime as they have more freedom and power to do so. And this is referred to as control theory. So there's control over women. And there's 2 examples you could point to. So you could point to the bedroom culture. So this idea that girls, sort of, younger girls and teenage girls are more likely to socialize at home, have friends over, maybe on social media, that sort of thing. Whereas boys are more likely to go out in public. So maybe hang out, at a shopping centre or go to a park or whatever it may be. And that means there's more, it's more likely that they're going to commit crimes in public or be caught committing crimes, and less likely for girls, obviously. And then on the flip side of that, we got the glass ceiling. So women experiencing these restrictions at work. So they're less likely to be promoted into opportunities of work and positions of power, which could essentially easily lead to criminality and manipulation. So that was control theory. So now we've got the functionalists. Now the functionalists don't really say anything. They don't really acknowledge this difference in gender. That the only thing you'd really point to, and you can look at the previous lessons on this, they mainly do their research into young working class men. So I guess if you did get a question on this in the exam, it would be very cruel. You would highlight people like Merton's strain theory or Cohen's youth subcultures and status frustration. And it's talking mainly about how it's men who experience this strain, or how it's sort of male youth subcultures. So things like lads and things like that. It's very similar for the Marxists. The Marxists don't really comment on it. They say it's more a working class issue as opposed to a gender issue. But what they do acknowledge, modern Marxists, that there has been this feminization of the workplace, and in the future it will lead to an increase in women committing crimes. So the interactionalists now, or labeling theory, so they acknowledge that crime can interlink with gender constructs. So ideas of what it is to be a man or woman, to be masculine or feminine. And interactionists believe that criminal labels can be associated with masculine acts. This can lead to self-fulfilling prophecy where men resort to deviant or criminal behavior to maintain or gain their masculinity. So an example of drug culture or football hooliganism. An example I use in class is that if a guy was to punch another guy, it'd be seen as maybe masculine. Whereas if it was a girl to punch another girl, it would just be seen as weird and, disgusting. So there's no status necessarily to gain from that, or very few situations where there would be. So what they're saying is there's these labels about gaining status that are often associated with masculinity, and criminality is associated with masculinity in this case. Okay, we've got two more now. These aren't necessarily direct theories. This can sometimes be associated with feminist theory, but we're not necessarily going to use it in a feminist argument. So this is the belief, the chivalry thesis, the belief a male-dominated police and court system go easier on women. So the thesis suggests this is because women are perceived to be less guilty and more vulnerable, often being seen to need help, not punishment. So it's rather condescending. It's based in sort of patriarchal practices or representations of women being sort of submissive to men or being seen as vulnerable or not capable of crime. And it's just saying, look, women are committing crime, but they're just being treated more leniently. As you go into A level, you actually look at this in a bit more detail, and you can actually see the more serious crimes women commit. They actually get prosecuted more than men because it's kind of a shock to the system. But in this case, all you need to know, chivalry thesis, this idea that the police and the courts go easier on women because they perceive them as either less guilty or more vulnerable. And in kind of the last one here, we've got inaccurate statistics. So women's crimes are more likely to be undetected because they are often less likely to be in public. So there's no more stigma associated with criminality as a woman. For example, women may be less likely to be caught instead doing discreet shoplifting or compared to a man who's publicly assaulting someone. So it's making the point that women are more likely to commit crimes that are not necessarily visible. So it's kind of like that idea of blue collar, white collar, how white collar crimes don't get highlighted as much because they're less visible or there's no direct victim. That's kind of what we're saying here. Okay, now last bit, last two bits. So you've got a 4 marker here. Task 3, I want you to identify and explain one way in which women may be controlled in public. So link this to the control theory and link this back to crime. Okay, and use that die approach. You've got an alternative 4 marker as well. Identify and explain one reason why men are more likely to be reported as criminals. So I'm just going to pause it 5 minutes, and then you can answer those. Right, so the final 12 marker now. And again, I want you to use the structure displayed on the screen. So the question is, discuss how far sociologists agree that patriarchy can be used as an explanation for differences in crime between men and women. So for that agree part of the patriarchy bit, you could talk about feminist theory, talk about control theory. And then for your disagree, you could talk about probably the easiest one to do there as a backup is interactionist, talk about how sort of masculine status may be associated with criminal labels. So things like getting in fights, taking drugs, more acceptable in society.